Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's Global Network webinar. This is our webinar for the first webinar for 2024. It's already February, but since we didn't meet in January, let me start by saying a belated Happy New Year to all the Global Network members. Wishing you healthy, happy, and prosperous 2024. So my name is Panya Yu. I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleagues Alexander Loschke and Sean Lowell. This webinar is organized by the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians. We use our online discussion group to network and to share knowledge on various areas of data and statistics. To date, we have about 3,200 members. And if you're not a member already, I invite you to join us with the link that I have shared in the chat box. So to kick off 2024, today we are very delighted to welcome Antra Bhatt from UN Women. She will be sharing data and insights from the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG Gender Snapshot 2023 report that was published last year. Antra's presentation will cover key insights from UN Women and UNDESA progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG Gender Snapshot 2023 report, which provides a comprehensive analysis of gender equality across all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So the 2023 report shows that halfway to the endpoint of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the world is failing to achieve gender equality, making it an increasingly distant goal. The presentation will discuss some of the key findings from the report, as well as present data and insights on all 17 SDGs. Antra will also focus on the need for an integrated, holistic approach to advancing gender equality, including multi-stakeholder collaboration and sustained financing backing, including through costing exercise of SDG 5, which she will be sharing. Let me now introduce our speaker. Antra Bhatt is statistics specialist in the research and data section of UN Women. Before joining UN Women in 2017, Antra worked as an assistant professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, India, and as a researcher at the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, as well as at the University of Chicago Urban Poverty Lab. Antra has published several pieces on gender inequality in peer-reviewed academic journals, UN reports, books, editorials, and blog series. She holds a Master's of Science in Public Policy and a doctorate degree in economics. Before we proceed to the presentation, I just want to share some housekeeping reminders. Our speaker will have 35 to 40 minutes to present, after which we will have a Q&A session. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to write your comments and questions at any time into the chat box that you can see to the right of the screen. During the Q&A session, we encourage you to ask your questions directly by using the raise hand function, or if you wish, we could also ask your questions on your behalf. Just let us know. Again, this Global Network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Global Network after the event. And we invite you to continue the discussion there after this webinar. And with that short introduction out of the way, I'm very excited to welcome Antra to start the presentation. The floor is yours, Antra.
Hey, great. Thank you so much, Pan. I'm going to try and share my screen. Okay. So hopefully that's working. All right. Okay.
Yes, it does. We can see it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so thank you so much for this opportunity. Delighted to be here on behalf of UN Women and UNDESA to present this joint report. It's called Progress on the SDGs, the Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Annual Gender Snapshot Report. As Panya mentioned, the report was launched in 2023, September, which is the annual release time of the report. And it presents the latest evidence on gender equality across all of the 17 SDGs, the trends, the gaps on the road to 2030, including projections, because this year we were at the midpoint of the SDGs, so we also tried to include some insights on what the future holds if we do not write the course. We do produce this with UNDESA, but in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the process, because it's a very collaborative process with all of the different agencies, the custodian agencies for all of the different SDGs, and it's really a report that comes together because we are able to collaborate with the different UN agencies and interagency processes. So we started this report series in 2019. The 2023 report is the 5th edition. You can see the first 4 covers here up on the slide. And it's not only a stock taking of progress thus far, but what we also try to do is to have an urgent call for action and to reiterate the point that if we fail to act on time, the trajectory that we are at, which already appears to be grim, will continue to be so in the future as well. Very briefly on the process we follow on the report. Since we look at all of the SDGs from a gender perspective, we do work with all of the custodian agencies, as I mentioned, for the goals collaboratively for the report. In time for the main SDG report, which DESA colleagues produce, we invite agencies to submit proposals for if they have any interesting stories or storylines for each of the SDGs that have a very strong gender angle, which we can cover in the report. And we do get a lot of good stories and a lot of good data from the great work that all of our colleagues do on disaggregations of the indicators. But otherwise, if we do not have anything new, we try to also from our side include some insights from complementary data and complementary analysis, but it's closely reviewed by the custodian agencies so we can ensure there is concordance with their knowledge products and their messaging as well. We really see this report as a companion to the main SDG report. It's a very short and concise snapshot of the gender story that's behind the SDGs, taking a similar goal by goal approach as the main report does, but just elaborating on the story and the emerging issues specifically from a gender perspective. Just before getting into the insights from the 2023 edition, I also want to mention the report is really short and concise. It's we try to keep it at about 30-35 pages, yet we cover all of the SDGs. We have a SDG 5 tracker as well, and we also try to include a couple of pages on the Leave No One Behind principle of the 2030 agenda. So as you can imagine, it's very difficult to do all of that in a very short report. And we are able to only dedicate just 1 page per goal, except for goal 5, which gets 2 pages, given that it's focused on gender equality. So obviously we cannot go into a lot of detail. But what we do is that whenever a new data set or a new analysis becomes available that is very robust and has a very strong gender dimension, we do work with custodian agencies on a dedicated paper that introduces the data set, that talks about the key insights from that through a series that we have, which is the Spotlight on the SDGs paper series. It's again something related to the snapshot, but goes into more detail into a particular goal. The most recent one we have done last year is on goal 6 in collaboration with UN Water. And in previous years, as you can see on the slide, there's a collage of the covers. We have produced these spotlight papers on Goal 1 with the World Bank, Goal 8 with ILO, Goal 11 with UN Habitat, and during the time of the peak COVID-19 crisis, we also produced one on gender and COVID-19 with the Gender and COVID-19 Working Group. At the end of the presentation, we'll leave you with a lot of links. So feel free to deep dive into each one of these or whichever one interests you when you get a chance, including on the SDG Gender Snapshot report. And with that introduction about the series, the report, let's deep dive a little bit into the findings. So in terms of the structure of the report, here's a snapshot of the key findings from the report. So what we try to do is that in the beginning of the report, we try to give a two-page spread on what's the latest evidence and data on each of the goals, calling attention to where progress on gender equality is falling behind and what should be done to put us back on track. We'll in the forthcoming slides, as you'll see, we'll get into each of these goals for this year, and also sort of like get into the insights, a little bit on the kind of data we've included, where we are, because I did mention that for this year, our focus really was on where are we now, where are we expected to be in 2030, and then what's needed, or how many times does the progress have to accelerate to be back on track to achieve the SDGs by 2030 from a gender perspective. So for most of the goals, you will see that since really this was the midpoint moment, we tried to show historical trends where they're available and then projections out to 2030 to show, again, where we are expected to be and how much progress needs to be accelerated. So getting into the specific goal by goal findings, I'll be going right from goal 1 up till goal 17. So thank you so much for your patience in listening to me. But this is really an idea to show you a glimpse into what we included this year into the report and the process we follow, the kind of insights we produce. So you can have understanding of where we are on gender equality, not just on goal 5, but on each of the goals, because we really want to re-emphasize the point that gender equality is not just about SDG 5. It's about really mainstreaming gender across all of the SDGs, because we cannot really achieve the SDGs if we just focus on goal 5. So for goal 1 this year, we included data on the outlook by 2030. And what we find is that if current trends continue, over 340 million women and girls, as you can see here on the slide, will be trapped in extreme poverty even by 2030. Now that's a really far call from the no poverty target. So we also include analysis which shows that progress must be 26 times faster than the current rate if we do want to get back on track and if we want to be achieving the goals, the targets, the indicators of the SDGs. These findings, they are largely bleak, but we also make clear that all hope is not lost. And what we try to include is not just what's happening right now or where we're expected to be, but also what needs to be done to get back on track. So as you can see here on this slide, we included some numbers based on a simulation analysis from UN Women, UNDP, and the Pardee Center for International Futures at the University of Denver, which shows that about 150 million women and girls could emerge from poverty by 2030 if governments implement a comprehensive strategy to improve access to education, to family planning, achieving equal wages, and extending social transfer. So change is possible and change can be done, but we just need the right investments in the policies that really work for women and girls, is the point we're trying to highlight for each of the goals. So what the situation is, what historically it has been, what the future holds, what we need to do to get back on track. So it's really like this 4 to 5 step narrative that we build in the report, along with key data that all of our stakeholders and readers of the report can use in their own efforts, whether it is as a policymaker, whether it is as an advocacy person who needs those key data and insights to make a case for change in the context that they are working on. Under goal 2, we find a similar bleak outlook. There isn't very much good news actually for many of the goals, unfortunately. But hopefully with the right policy actions, these trends can be reversed. But essentially for the goal on zero hunger, if current trends continue, close to 1 in 4 women and girls worldwide will continue to be moderately or severely food insecure by 2030. A reality that is only likely to worsen as we see there's lots of impacts of climate change happening, which affect agricultural production and so on, and a lot of natural disasters as well. But in addition to that, the norms, women's unequal status in society and in agri-food systems, it really spurs their vulnerability to hunger. Only half or nearly half of women in agriculture, for example, they work as contributing family workers. So they receive little or no pay, which really gives them no or very little bargaining power when it comes to even making decisions within the households about how the food resources will be distributed. For goal 3, this is really a goal that also includes a lot of targets and indicators that are very specifically speaking to women and girls. So, for example, maternal mortality ratio. So this year we focused on maternal mortality rates, showing the evidence and the trend over time. So we see that there has been progress over time. It had the maternal mortality rates, they have declined over time. But we also see that since 2015, this progress has stalled. And we try to make the links here with the low availability of skilled birth personnel in many countries, and the need for really accelerating progress around listening to what's needed for women and girls and what the data shows us in terms of how we can make improvements in these in the outcomes of these targets and indicators. For goal 4, we wanted to focus on exclusion indicators. I know that we have a lot of us who are familiar with the discourse on gender and education. We have been hearing that the enrollment rates and also the completion rates when it comes to primary and secondary schooling, girls are consistently surpassing boys. So we know that when girls enroll in school, their completion rates, they consistently surpass that of boys. But we also need to focus on girls who never get a chance to enter the classroom. So it's one thing to try to improve inclusion indicators that tell us a little bit about outcomes of women and girls who were included in a particular strata of society, whether it's education. But the data really shows us that in 2023, which is last year, up to 129 million girls and young women may be out of school globally, which is a huge number. And this number is expected to remain at 110 million by 2030. So while we focus on some of these indicators on completion, it's also important to focus on the aspects of opportunities, including exclusion, as I mentioned, because that really speaks to the leave no one behind principle of the 2030 agenda. On goal 5, we always include a lot because all of the indicators are gender specific. And again, it's really disheartening to see that active resistance and lackluster commitment to gender equality and chronic underinvestments are significant factors contributing to slow progress on this goal. And in some cases, we've also been seeing the reversal of the gains that we made. So many parts of the world, for example, they even have yet to develop strong legal frameworks. So, for example, 54% of countries still lack key laws on gender equality, including on equal rights to enter marriage, initiate a divorce, as you can see on this slide. So we have even not made enough progress on laws and policies. And then on outcomes, we see that there is a reflection of not prioritizing women and girls because, as you can now see on this slide, you see a few indicators where we are not seeing good progress, but even by 2030 or by 2050, we are not expected to be where we wanted to be for the 2030 agenda. So here we see that there have been a lot of setbacks, particularly among women and girls who are living in fragile and conflict-affected countries. There is growing vulnerability due to human-induced climate change, natural disasters that are all worsening the outlook for gender equality. And when we look at some indicators like key areas of decision making, women continue to have an unequal seat at the table. So globally, women hold just 27% of seats in parliament. That's way behind the 50% or parity target. And with this snail's pace of progress, the women's share of workplace management positions on the private side will reach only 30% by 2030. So again, we are not on track to achieve some of these outcomes that we want to. And at the current rate of progress by 2050, women will still spend on average 2.3 hours per day on unpaid care on average 2.3 hours per day more on unpaid care and domestic work than men, which really speaks to the gender norms that we see in households and how they really are not changing over time and are continuing to stay the way they are, or even if things are changing, it's really at a snail's pace. So again, as you can see, the theme is really we need to accelerate progress. And then in the report, I'll also include a slide towards the end. We do show ways and concrete actions by which this can be done. But it's important to have this data to have the perspective on how things are going. On goal 6, as I mentioned earlier, we did a full spotlight paper in collaboration with UN Water this year. So this year, the focus was really to summarize some key findings from the paper in the snapshot report. For the first time with this paper, we have estimates that show specifically disaggregated statistics by sex on people living in water-stressed countries. So we have estimates of the number of women and girls who are living in water-stressed countries and how these numbers are expected to be by 2050 based on the current trajectory, and how climate change threatens any advancements which are being made in this area. So I encourage you to look at the snapshot reports goal 6 spread. And if you're interested in goal 6, then please also have a look at the spotlight paper, which goes into a lot of details with data and evidence on how the how not focusing on women and girls is impacting the achievement of SDG 6. For goal 7, we focused on the impact of the lack of affordable and clean energy on gender equality. You can see a powerful stat here on the slide on how many millions of women and girls can be lifted out of poverty if access to electricity is available. And again here, unless progress accelerates by 2030, an estimated 341 million women and girls will still lack electricity by 2030, and 85% of those women and girls will reside in sub-Saharan Africa. So we also see very specific regional effects for some of these indicators, which we include in the report. So it's really about thinking about who we are leaving behind within this within women and girls as well, to see where targeted action is needed. For goal 8, we focused on how the inequality within the home. I mentioned to you some key stats on unpaid care and domestic work. Ultimately, those are linked and how they translate to inequality outside the home. So globally, just to give you some statistics on labor participation rates, less than 2/3, about 61.4% of prime age working women, so ages 25 to 54, were in the labor force in 2022 compared to 90.6% of prime working age men. So we see that men's universal participation almost in the labor market, but a really relatively lower participation of women in the labor market, which again is a reflection of what's going on at the home. And obviously, if this happens, this translates into inequalities also in labor income earnings. And as you can see here on the slide, the stat up here tells us the inequality in the income, labor income share that women earn. So it's really powerful and telling in terms of the linkages that one can make with each of the goals and how progress on each one of them is intellect with progress on the others as well. For goal 9, we've all been talking a lot about artificial intelligence, about machine learning. There's all these buzzwords going on, but we also really want to understand what is women's role in all of this. Are they being included in some of these different technological changes that are happening as we speak? So for this, we talked a little bit more about women in STEM for this edition. As you can see, another bleak story, we don't really have a good representation of women in STEM, very few as a total share, and women's absence in the emerging AI industry. It's already has had an adverse impact on how well technology supports women and responds to their needs. Because if we do not include them in some of these key discussions, then their needs and responses are not included, which just further exacerbates some of these inequalities as well. And since we are again talking a lot about these new technology, artificial intelligence, it's also good to see how and if women are present in all of these innovations that are taking place. Unfortunately, we don't have really good data on this, but from what we have, we do see that understanding their presence in participating in some of these tools is difficult. But from what we know, it's again not a great news either. As you can see on this slide, women are 5 times less likely to be listed as an inventor on international patents. They are also underrepresented in key skills that are needed for keeping up with technology, such as the knowledge of programming languages. Women are 2 times less likely than men to know a computer programming language, and this really speaks to the inequalities we are seeing in access to some of these technology, but also participation around the changes that are happening as part of the adoption of these technologies, because women are really missing from the whole discourse around it. For goal 10 this year, we focused on which the goal in general talks about reducing inequalities. So we wanted to highlight that it's important to remember that the women and girls, they're not just like a one group monolith, and gender discrimination actually comes in many forms. So for example, if we look at women with disabilities, for example, comprising an estimated 18% of the female population, they face infringement on their rights, including their rights to adequate housing, accessible public spaces. And if we are to really achieve gender equality and think about reducing inequalities, it's important that the rights of all women and girls are upheld, women and girls in all of their diversity, including indigenous women, women and girls with disabilities, LGBTQI plus women, and even older women who are often overlooked from some of these statistics as well, with some of the focus on reproductive ages. So moving on to goal 11, we focused on the sustainability of urban areas for this edition. In the past, we have focused on women who live in slums as well, but I think slums and slum-like conditions. But this year we wanted to really emphasize the point that all of us know that urbanization is an upward trend. We are closely and fastly moving towards a very urbanized world. But are these urban areas where most of the world's population is likely to live in the coming years, are they giving enough attention to women's specific risks and vulnerabilities? So by 2050, an estimated 70% of the world's female population, about 3.3 billion women and girls, will live in urban areas. And if current trends continue, 1 billion women and girls globally will reside in slums, informal settlements, or experience inadequate housing by 2050. So what can we do to sort of keep in mind that as urban spaces develop, we are really paying attention to the needs of women and girls from the urban perspective as well. In addition to all of this, we are also facing an existential crisis which is affecting life on planet. We know climate change has accelerated. So for all of the climate goals, we clubbed 12, 13, 14, and 15 in one spread. And we really wanted to focus this year on showing the impact of climate change on women and girls. Unfortunately, we do not have enough data on climate change and its impact on women and girls, specifically in a lot of the indicators. So we usually just club and have a climate goal story in just one spread. But this year we were able to commission a work with which was jointly done by UN Women, UNDP, and the Pardee Center for International Futures, which has the International Futures model, to include some simulations and projections on the impact of climate change on women and girls. So for the first time, we have some data which is not official national data, but it's really showing us what the impact of climate change is expected to be on women and girls. So it's really a good indication of where we are headed if we do not bring about change. Of course, I have to say by no means do these data replace any official data sources, but they do help us to understand where we are and how alarming the situation is. So you can see on the slide here the stat that under a worst climate scenario by 2050, we are going to see as many as the stat is actually here, as many as 158 million more women and girls who will be pushed into poverty. That's 16 million more than the total number of men and boys. So we are seeing a differentiated impact on women and girls of gender and climate change. But we really need more efforts to step up and to recognize the fact that the climate change issues are really impacting women and girls disproportionately. So multi-sectoral plans and efforts to respond to climate change, they must prioritize women and girls most at risk. A lot more is needed in the areas of conservation, disaster preparedness, adaptation, and resilience, including expanding women's access to quality health, education, economic opportunities, and information. And if we do not invest in some of these things, we are going to see devastating consequences, not just in the poverty numbers, but also in food insecurity. So, coming back to this previous slide, you will see that as climate change worsens, up to 236 million more women and girls will face food insecurity by 2050 as compared to 131 million more men and boys. So it's really a reflection of how this impact is really expected to be gender differentiated. So that's on the environmental goals. We're almost at goal 16 now. And on this very important goal 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions, unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of regression. We do have included this time in the report the number of women and girls in conflict affected contexts, which has risen by 50% and is opening the door to protracted low development and catastrophic consequences across generations. In fact, just to give you a stat which is also up here on the slide, the number of women and girls living in conflict affected contexts has doubled since 2017, and it's now over 600 million. So, one of the goals where we're actually seeing a regression. Lastly, but not least, on goal 17, which really speaks to the partnership for all the goals, we do highlight and reiterate each year the need for gender mainstreaming in resources that are being pooled to achieve all of the SDGs. Yet we see that just 4% of all the bilateral allocable overseas development assistance goes to programs where gender equality is the main objective. And this is a notable decrease from 5% in previous years. So we do want to argue for more, but we're actually seeing some regressions here as well. So we really need to step up for this. So now I think I come to the most interesting part of the report, which is really cutting edge, and we could not have done this without a great collaboration with UNCTAD this year. What we tried to do was, okay, so there are all these bleak stories that we are seeing for each of the goals, but what is the commitment that is needed in terms of financial resources to really just accelerate progress on gender equality and put us back on track? So we definitely need to have more aid flows, but what is really the investment that is needed to make the gender equality promise an actual reality? So with this collaborative work with UNCTAD this year, we estimated that an additional $360 billion per year is needed as part of a gender-focused stimulus package to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment across key global goals. The analysis has some caveats, which you will see in the report, but it really is very cutting edge, and it's emphasizing how strong and effective accountability mechanisms at the national, regional, and global levels, and well-grounded data and statistics. All of these will be key if we really want to achieve gender equality. So it does seem like a big number up here on the slide, but this is what we really need to put us back on track. And it's great that we were able to include something like this for the first time in the report, thanks to the collaboration. So apart from all this goal by goal information, I've sort of given you a snapshot of what we include for all of the SDGs in the report. We also include a couple of other things that I'm going to talk about in this last part of the presentation. So as you know that in the main SDG report, there is some inclusion of a tracker on how we are doing on all of the SDGs, how progress is keeping up. So in the snapshot report, what we focus on is including progress on SDG 5 on all of the targets, the indicators and sub-indicators of SDG 5 specifically. What it shows us is that we are off track on this important goal. As you can see, we have a comparison of how we were doing in 2022 with 2023 on the slide. And at this critical midpoint, none of the goal 5 indicators are at target met or almost met. There are just 2 that are close to target. 8 of them are moderate distance to target, and 4 are actually far or very far from target. And for 4, we do not even have the ability or the data to provide this assessment at a global level. So sufficient data do not exist. It's really the data availability issue is huge. And right now for SDG 5, we are at 56%, which is a little bit of an improvement from 2022. But it's really that almost half of the data on even trying to understand how we are doing on goal 5 is missing. The data from official sources, this is only counting the data in the UN SDG indicator database, which is the key and official database for understanding how we are doing on all of the goals, is really missing. So we really need to speed up efforts, because first we need to know how we are doing. Only then we can make the case for what works or what needs to be accelerated in terms of progress. So here you can see the view of this tracker by region and by indicator. This is a huge visual. So I think what's really important to take away from this and the next slide is that we would like to see a lot of blue and greens on this slide, which those 2 colors represent target met or close to target. Instead, what you will see is too few blues, too few greens, and more of the darker hues like red and orange. So that's not what we want to see. But even when you break up the story by region or by indicators and targets specifically, we see that we are way off from achieving the SDGs. This is half of the story. The next half is here on this other slide. Just take a moment to see that it's again very difficult to take your eyes off some of the really dark colors on the oranges and the reds. So that's really the point of the tracker, to keep us informed of how we are doing year on year in terms of progress. And again, we don't see a lot of encouraging stories here. Finally, each year we also include, as I mentioned, a 2-page spread on the Leave No One Behind special focus. And we focused on older women for this year. Some of the data that we included here is from UNDESA's report on aging, and there's a section in UNDESA that works specifically on this topic. So they had a report which we summarized the key findings from, but we also tried to include some other complementary data on from the gender perspective on older women. So older women, the storyline that emerges from this is that older women, more likely than older men, are likely to be widowed, less likely to remarry, more likely to live alone in their older life, and more likely to live in extreme poverty than men. And this is not something that happens in a short span of time. A higher likelihood of career interruptions, being in part-time employment, lower earnings, and more time spent on going back to the linkages with SDG 5 on unpaid care responsibilities. It really means that by the time women reach old age, they have very few assets or savings, which really exacerbates their economic security. So it's there is really like a explanation for this of the life cycle as it pans out for women and girls that we need to pay attention to and bring at the forefront of the policy discourse as well. And then what we also discuss is the issue of violence against older women, which is also a significant health concern. Some stats show that globally the prevalence of intimate partner violence among older women, it ranges from 16.5% to 54.5%, depending on the context that we talk about. And not just intimate partner violence, but older women also face a series of other types of violence, like psychological abuse, controlling behaviors, financial and economic abuse as well. These are issues that need to be highlighted so that policy design frameworks focus on the needs of all groups of women and girls. And that was the reason for including older women in this edition. So we could really bring attention to their needs as well. So as you can see, the findings are largely bleak, but we also make clear that all hope is not lost. We still have time to take decisive actions to accelerate progress. The report contains various recommended policy priority actions, to change laws and enact policies that can spearhead progress. For example, legal frameworks have the power to drive positive change, as I was mentioning in the Goal 5 discussion, as evidenced by countries with domestic violence legislation experiencing lower rates of intimate partner violence. So some literature does show that correlation. We also need increasing investments in care policies. I think I've talked about unpaid care and domestic work over and over again in this presentation. So we really need focus on that, including the quality and affordable childcare services, which really are the main reason why women of prime working age are not even in participating in the labor market, which has its trickle down effects, as I mentioned. So we show the latest evidence, but we also touch upon the what's needed to accelerate progress, as you will see in the report. Just before wrapping up, I did want to take a moment to recognize that for this report, we try as much as possible to rely on the data that are in the UN SDG indicator database. Since these are officially reported data, and in no way can we replace these data with anything that are collected from formal reporting mechanisms and are properly vetted by countries themselves. Yet data are sparse for many indicators, as I was mentioning on the data availability slide. So we tried to complement some of these official data with other robust sources as much as available to fill critical data gaps. For example, the data on the poverty and food insecurity forecasts and the links with climate change is an example of what we included this year. But there is really a need on the data front to make a case for more investments in capacity building at the country level amongst stakeholders to better utilize gender disaggregated data for SDG monitoring, and to really go beyond just sex disaggregations to focus on multidimensional deprivations, on who is being left behind from the intersectional perspective. For example, women and girls in disabilities or older women. So just not stopping at this first level disaggregation of men and women. But just also pointing out something for all of us to think about for the future is that as part of the future of gender and SDGs monitoring, we'll need to in the future also think about things like AI, machine learning, and their role in monitoring of the SDGs. There are advantages to some of that, and we are already seeing some efforts in that direction. But we also want to raise this point that there are key ethical considerations that need to be kept in mind for this. So, how we maintain fairness, transparency, accountability while embracing the benefits of technology for some of this monitoring. So that's just food for thought for all of us that we expect to include in maybe some of the future editions as well. To close, I invite you all to dive into the report, reflect on its findings, and on the actions we can take to promote the achievement of gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. As I mentioned, we also have the Spotlight paper series. So if you're interested in a specific topic on which we have a Spotlight paper, please do take a look at it. We can also share the PowerPoint later, so you will have access to some of these topics as well. And the web links are all embedded in here as well. With that, I think I will turn it over to Panha. And thank you so much for listening to me for so long. And I hope to engage in a good discussion with you all on some of these topics that we discussed today. Panha and colleagues are also co-authors of this report. As I mentioned, we jointly do this work with UNDESA. So I would also invite him, I know he's moderating today, but also to invite him to join in any of the questions or anything that you have for all of us, because it's really a teamwork that allows us to produce this report. So I'll stop sharing my screen and over to you, Panha.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Antra, for this presentation. It's data packed, to say the least, and it's very useful to have in one place the whole picture of how gender equality is progressing or not progressing, right? So the fact that this gender snapshot focuses not only on SDG 5, but also in other indicators in all the 17 goals, it's very useful and I think very unique. It's hard to find a publication like that. Certainly, a lot of the data points are bleak. That's very obvious to everyone who saw the presentation. But to me, also what kind of stuck out for me is just the amazing, return on investment or impact that could be done by increased resources to kind of deal with some of these issues in achieving gender equality, right? So I think on the hopeful side, I think the areas of focus is clear. The return on investment is high. Now it's just a matter of basically, getting the political will and the resources together to tackle the issue. All right, so that was a wonderful presentation. I want to now invite the audience, if you have any questions, to just use the raise hand function that you can find at the top of the screen. I have already enabled microphones and videos. So if you have any questions for Antra, please let us know. Any takers? I see Diana. Please go ahead with your question, Diana.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for the presentation. I am sure that some people here in the call are still digesting the information. So more than a question, I think from my side, I have a comment on some indicators for the SDGs that are at the populational level. Let's say, for example, electricity access or air pollution. So in these cases where you have everybody breathing the same air, when we make these estimates, I don't work with those estimates, so that's why I'm asking. When these estimates say that there's 193 million women that are exposed to polluted air, I think in those cases specifically, I don't know if gender disaggregation is the most important indicator. Maybe we have rural and urban that are variables that will fit better in air pollution, for example, or in those indicators that are at the population level. So I don't know what questions, if you have discussed about this, if you have any ideas, and also from the experts that are in this call, what do you think? Because I know that there are so many variables that, of course, they need to be disaggregated by sex, but I don't know, access to health services and other barriers, but air pollution or electricity, I don't know if these are better for the whole population. So what are your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you so much for your question, Diana. It's a very important and crucial question and allows me to talk about the issues we've been facing with some of these indicators that are collected at the household level. Now, this includes, for example, data on poverty. I think we face the same issue. These data are collected at the household level. They're really sort of estimates of overall household level poverty. And then when we talk about women in poverty, we are very careful to say we are talking about the proportion of women who are living in poor households. So not women in poverty, because these data are not, they are collected at the individual level in some countries, but in most income and expenditure surveys, these are collected at the household level. So we really face the same issue even for something as basic as poverty. And as you mentioned, things get more complicated for topics that have some issues of even things that apply to the whole population. For example, you mentioned air quality that affects everybody. Now, if you have more women living in an area with very bad air pollution, you are going to see that the number of women and girls being affected are higher than men. but there are really some of those structural factors that would have allowed for that, because otherwise, if you think about the way we do these analysis, they are really to just estimate these using the population of women and men in these different contexts. So there really should not be any difference, as you mentioned, but we do see differences. So it seems like structurally there are more women in poor households than men. And then why do those things happen? So we try to go a little bit behind some of those factors. And that's the reason why we disaggregate some of these statistics by sex. But this is why I mentioned that we cannot just stop there. We need to do multi-level disaggregation. So like you mentioned, in the case of air pollution, for example, we need to do region and sex. So we need to focus on urban-rural divides as well, but also to see the impact, the gender differentiated impact of that as well. In an ideal scenario, we would try to collect some of these data at the individual level where possible. But for things like air pollution, it's not possible also, because you breathe the same air, and how do you even develop frameworks around that? So this is a problem we have, and there is no good solution. But it's important, as you mentioned, to recognize some of these things and to try to work around these things with multi-level disaggregation. So you really know who's deprived, not just on one front, but on all of the different deprivations as they come together.
Thank you very much, Diana, for that great question. And thank you, Antra, for clarifying. Let me take a couple more questions from the audience. If you have any comments or questions, please do raise your hand. I don't see any yet, so maybe I will ask a question of my own. I think one of the things that is an innovation in this version of the report is the use of non-traditional sources of data and modeling and so on to kind of try to fill in some of the data gaps in gender statistics, right? So Antra, I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about any particular areas or categories of gender statistics that are ripe for this kind of innovation, where you can use modeling or other technique or AI and so on to kind of try to fill these data gaps. Give us a little bit of sense of where kind of the promises are the highest when it comes to introducing that kind of innovation.
Absolutely. Again, that's a really a good point and questions where we. So in fact, one of those last slides that I put up there was more like a food for thought for all of us on where we could use some of these new technologies and advancements in data while being careful about ethics as well. So I think that already from and I think this may be a question actually for the custodian agencies themselves, and UN Women is working with the custodian agencies to collect some of these data, but actually the data collection process and everything is held by them. So I can just answer a little bit based on what we know, but I think there might be colleagues in this call who might be even better placed to answer some of these questions, and feel free to, pitch in if you have any insights. But I think that some of the interesting projects, they're all in pilot phase, by the way, because this is just something that is not very easy to mainstream and all of that, but there is a lot of work going on in, for example, poverty data collection with the use of geographic information systems, and even understanding a lot of the climate change impacts, the impacts of disasters using geographic information systems, because a lot of time in places like that, we are not able to collect data on the ground. It's the traditional surveys that are being conducted, they are just not possible to be conducted in such context. So it's really good that we do have some tools available to get some of those data from these technologies, and geographic information systems are really powerful tool on which a lot of work is being done in a lot of countries on especially understanding the mapping of how disasters are impacting people on the ground, women and girls as well as I think on main and key outcomes like where you see spots or areas where you do not have people with even basic necessities such as like access to food. So I think it's really powerful to think about the context of these new innovations in some of those topics. For climate change, we were able to do this modeling work with, as I mentioned, with the Pardee Center. That's really just an indication of what the impacts could be. It's really like more of a simulation and modeling analysis that allows you to look at the changing weather patterns, something called RCPs. I'm still getting used to some of these terminologies. And what's the impact of that on women and girls, specifically because we know that when disasters strike, they affect men and women differently. So just trying to include some of those factors, or for example, on fertility rates, what's the impact on women's fertility rates, but also on women's specific needs during that time. So for example, if there are disasters striking, you may have a lot of pregnant women and girls who need special care and attention. So how do you bring in some of those elements into the modeling exercises as well becomes very important, rather than running the model itself. So I think it's AI and machine learning and projections and modelings are all very powerful tools, but it's also important to remember that they have to be used in a very nuanced way. But I do see that for poverty, for food insecurity, for the impact of climate change, there is a huge potential there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those are already very significant areas, right? So I think the fact that I understand the need to kind of be very clear and tell the readers that some of the information does not come from the kind of official sources. They come from other alternative, non-traditional sources. But as long as that caveat is clear to everyone, I think to be able to use those tools to fill in data gaps in poverty or climate change and so on is extremely powerful. I see a question in the chat about whether there are data for Guyana. I suppose a more general question would be, at what level of analysis are we doing in this gender snapshot, and whether, for people who are interested, whether it's possible to find data at country level as well.
Sure. No, that's a great question. So for most of the countries, we as we mentioned, this is a global report, so we really just touch upon overall estimates. But what we include is the SDG 5 tracker that's available at the global, regional, and country level. So that's the Excel sheet to look at, where we will have data on all of the countries that are included in the official SDG indicator database. So if there is data on Guyana in the official SDG database, you will find it on the SDG 5 tracker as well. I do want to mention that for the modeling work we did on climate change, on the estimates of poverty and food insecurity, we do have data for 186 countries as well. So I can drop a link in the chat to a technical paper that we released as an offshoot to that. And there you will definitely find data on Guyana, on the impact of climate change on women's poverty and food insecurity as well. They're just simple annex tables in that report, but there should be data on the country and context that you're looking at as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and even more generally, I would say if you Google global SDG database, UN Statistics Division maintains a database that also go into country levels. It's not necessarily just for gender statistics, but for all the 17 goals. So if you're interested, certainly go and just Google it. The first link would be the one that you want to check out. Related to that, Antra, there's a question about whether there are disaggregated data by vulnerable groups of women, for example, immigrants, and I suppose how that's treated in the report. And thank you for sending the links as well to the tracker and to other resources.
Yes, sure. Yeah, I will post more links after this question, but I think that on women migrants, again, the issue is that we do include the data that are available on the migration statistics that are there in terms of women migrants. But again, those numbers are mostly at the global level. So as you would have seen from the slide, I gave you a little bit of a snapshot on the number of women, girls who are living in conflict affected countries. But the 2022 report, for example, focused specifically on migrants. So we try to include different topics each year. One year we included internally displaced populations, because it's important to also look at the disaggregation and understanding of migrants. So there are migrants within the country, and that's also like a huge subpopulation that we need to think about. So we 1 year focused on IDPs specifically, and 1 year we focused on international migration as well. So I'm going to drop some links in the chat. We do have global data for this, but any country level data, as Panha mentioned, would be in the official indicator database for whatever indicator corresponds to the migration category. But I'll drop in links now on the chat on the migrants analysis.
Thank you. Is there any last question, any pressing question that you would like? So let me again invite you to use your raise hand function if there's any one last question for our speaker. All right, I'll take one last question from the floor. I saw a hand up, but now it's back down. Last chance, last call for question. Joanna, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I have been trying to put my hand up, but I couldn't. It's just to follow up on the discussion on if Diana was talking about do we actually need to disaggregate every indicator to look at sex or gender, and the thing here is just maybe for future research, how do we focus on key questions where maybe sex-related issues are happening and where you can look at causality, because if you mix that with the sector, the economic sector, then maybe the causality is related what you were saying before, for instance, in the idea that a woman might not be that incentivized to join education sectors where are engineers or something like that, and not necessarily the other way around. So causality is good, and it would be great to identify key sectors where really sex is an issue, and then to invest in data, because otherwise it would be like, I mean, here we are talking is about inclusion, right? It's about inclusion, and inclusion is not just about sex or gender, but it's many, many things. So when you go to the country level, the countries would have different policies for inclusion, for inclusivity, which is young population as well, sex, gender, discapacity, many, many things, right? So how do we support countries with this? Identifying actually the areas where sex is an issue, or gender, depending on how you are using the data. So that would be very, very useful, and that would be really, really great.
Thank you, Joanna. All right, Antra, quickly.
Yes, very quick answer. Very long, very long answers possible, but I will give a very quick answer to this. So I think that this is a very important issue you raised, and that's why in the Gender Snapshot report, we do not focus on disaggregating all of the SDGs and all of the indicators from a gender perspective. As you said, it doesn't make sense. When you see the report, you will see that we just focus on one key indicator that is critical for understanding the dynamics for that particular goal or spread. So the idea is not to disaggregate the 200 plus indicators in the SDG database by sex and gender, because that really doesn't make sense. But we do focus on some of the causality related factors where we have data. So for example, I mentioned unpaid care and domestic work is one of the key topics that is really at the root of many of these things. It has links with income, with the labor market, with inequalities outside the home, so many other factors. So we always try to focus on having data gaps filled there. I've just posted in the chat modeling and projections we've done on that indicator, which really lacks data. But that is why we also mentioned that time use surveys, for example, are a critical resource that countries should invest in to understand how those dynamics are playing out as well. So yeah, completely agree with you, but agree that we should not disaggregate everything by sex and gender. But that's why this report is very powerful in terms of really putting the focus on just one key thing that matters for a particular goal from the gender perspective.
Thank you very much. Sadly, we run out of time. I think we could go on for another half an hour or so with this fascinating conversation. But thank you again, Antra, for this wonderful presentation. It's very insightful. We are left with a lot to ponder. And I hope that we also are left with some sense of possibility of what is achievable, right, if we put our mind to it. As I mentioned earlier, the recording and the presentation will be shared in the global network, so you could definitely go and access it there. For now, before we end, I'll just want to ask you for a small favor for everyone who can. Please turn on your camera and unmute yourself and join me in giving a big round of applause to Antra for her presentation. Antra, thank you so much. Look forward to working together again this year.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be part of this group. And thanks to all of you for listening to me for so long.
Thank you, Antra. Bonjour, everyone. See you at the next Global Network webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.